Let me speak to you gently for a moment, not as someone trying to control your choices, but as someone who understands how easily spiritual sensitivity can be lost without us even realizing it. One of the most underestimated influences in the life of a believer is music. Music is not just sound. It is not just entertainment. Music is a carrier of words, emotions, attitudes, and atmosphere. And whether we admit it or not, what we repeatedly listen to slowly becomes what we think, what we feel, and eventually how we discern. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 4 verse 23, "Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life." That verse doesn't tell us to guard our hearts casually. It says with all diligence, meaning intentionally, carefully, and consistently. One of the main gates to the heart is the ear. What enters your ears repeatedly will eventually settle in your heart, even if you don't agree with it consciously. Now, here's where many believers get confused. They say, "But I don't believe the lyrics," or "I just like the beat," or "It doesn't affect me." But influence doesn't need permission to work, it only needs exposure. Romans 12 verse 2 tells us, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." The mind is renewed by what it feeds on consistently. Worldly or secular music often promotes values that are opposite to the nature of Christ: pride, sexual immorality, rebellion, self-exaltation, emotional instability, and sometimes even violence. Even when the lyrics are subtle, the message is still there. Over time, something begins to happen quietly. Your spirit becomes less sensitive. You still pray, but prayer feels shorter. You still read scripture, but conviction feels weaker. You still worship, but depth feels reduced. Not because God has changed, but because the heart has become crowded. Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice." That tells us something important. The ability to hear God clearly depends on how many other voices are competing inside you. Discernment thrives in clarity. Clarity struggles in noise. When your mind is filled daily with lyrics that normalize sin, glorify the flesh, or center life around self, your ability to detect what is spiritually wrong begins to dull. You don't notice compromise as quickly. You excuse things you once resisted. You tolerate attitudes you once rejected. This is how sensitivity is lost, not suddenly, but slowly. Philippians 4 verse 8 tells us to focus on what is pure, noble, true, and praiseworthy. Why? Because whatever occupies your mind eventually shapes your responses. Music becomes the background voice of your life. It plays when you're driving, when you're resting, when you're emotional, when you're tired. And in those unguarded moments, messages sink deepest. Another thing many believers don't consider is that music carries spiritual atmosphere. In 1 Samuel 16, when David played worship music, the evil spirit tormenting Saul left. That means sound can either invite peace or provoke unrest. Music is not neutral, it either calms the flesh or feeds it. So when believers constantly listen to music that excites lust, anger, pride, or emotional chaos, they shouldn't be surprised when temptation increases and spiritual hunger decreases. This is not condemnation, it is spiritual law. Galatians 6 verse 7 says, "Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." What you sow into your spirit through sound will eventually produce fruit, either spiritual or fleshly. Now, this is important, this teaching is not about legalism. It is not about saying every secular song is evil or that God is angry with you for listening. It's about wisdom and growth. As believers mature, their appetites change. What once entertained them begins to distract them. What once felt harmless begins to feel heavy. That's not restriction, that's discernment developing. Hebrews 5 verse 14 tells us that mature believers have their senses trained to discern good and evil. Notice it says senses, not just thoughts. Discernment includes what you hear. Spiritual sensitivity is delicate. It grows in quietness, purity, prayer, and focus. It weakens in constant noise, distraction, and fleshly stimulation. When you protect your ear, you protect your spirit. When you guard what you listen to, you guard your intimacy with God. So instead of asking, "Is this song a sin?" a better question is this song feeding my spirit, or feeding my flesh? Does this draw me closer to God, or quiet His voice? Is this sharpening my discernment, or dulling it? Because intimacy with God is not sustained accidentally. It is sustained intentionally. The closer you walk with God, the more careful you become with what you allow to shape your inner world. And that's not bondage. That's freedom. You can drop your question in the comments section as you subscribe and like our videos. God bless and reward you mightily.